All right, so I like message my the people in my chat to make sure everything is the sound is working. And is
I
the
took a bit of halo in
sound
my head.
working? Question mark. Yeah, it does look like you have a halo.
Me?
Yeah, yeah.
Me.
That's.
The
I don't know whether the light
with,
in the room is actually good enough, and I'll turn this one off. No, that's the light from the outside. It's the
Yep,
sun.
it's totally fine.
Sorry
I
about
think it
that.
looks cool. So, all
Yeah,
right,
there's
all
nothing to
right.
do. I live in an attic. Yeah.
It looks like we are live. So thanks, guys. I appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and no apologies before we get started?
Do you want to start, Javi?
Mm-hmm. Well, you gave us a little bit of an intro. Thanks, Tom, for having a chat with us. We're in Coffs Harbour here in the east coast of Australia. That's just in between Brisbane and Sydney, for any of your listeners. Lovely spot, and it's morning. So the end of the world hasn't come yet because we're ahead of you, and we would have known. So Steve and I and Phil, who's not with us, are three friends of ours who've got together to discuss issues. We call it No Apologies because it's apologetics, giving a reason for the faith we have. And so that's our No Apologies group. We started about 5 years back. We were church friends and have developed an interest in this particular area. So I personally I'm a associate professor in gynecology and obstetrics at one of the local universities and head up a busy obstetric practice. I deliver babies, I look after women's reproductive care. So that's a little bit about me. I'm married to Kathy with three lovely children. I've got a grandchild who's incubating as we speak, and we're waiting anxiously for news. So that's a little bit about me.
So my name is Steve. Obviously, I belong to the same group as Harvey. We started an apologetics group something around 4 or 5 years ago, and COVID was the initiator for us to go online. I've been a Christian for probably something around 30 years. I'm not necessarily certain that apologetics was the reason for me to become a Christian, although I think it's been very helpful for me on my journey, because I think most Christians at some point in their life ask themselves all the hard questions of why do they believe what they believe. Some do it before, some do it afterwards. Not everybody's the same, naturally. And most Christians would go through some degree of, you might call it crisis in terms of, does what I believe actually make sense? Does it comport with reason? Does it fit with reality? Does it explain the world that we live in? And for me personally, I think, there are lots of really interesting arguments, and no doubt we'll probably touch on some of those. I don't think any one of the individual arguments explains or sufficiently answers the reason why I think it's valuable and why it's a good choice to make to believe in God. But I think that for me, what's convincing is the cumulative effect of evidence. In terms of when I look at all of the evidence combined, it seems to be very rationally cogent, and then it's what's helped me. If anything, every time I seem to ask questions, it just seems to, my faith gets stronger. And not because I believe that faith is the reason for it, but I think it's just the evidence. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yeah, cool. And do you want to mention where people can find your YouTube channel on YouTube? YouTube / No Apologies, I think, right?
Yeah, well, and if you look for No Apologies on YouTube, naturally you'll find lots of rock bands, because that's been quite a theme. So and we actually are in the process. At some point, YouTube allows you to rename your channel to have a meaningful name rather than the individual random hash, if you like, that they will give you. And I think we're almost there in terms of the numbers of subscribers. So, but we might flick you the link that you can add it to the stream if you want at the end.
Sure, we'll do. So thanks, guys. I am an atheist, by which I mean I believe that naturalism better explains everything about the world. So when I look at the arguments, I think that naturalism can provide better answers than a God can. Could you tell me some of the reasons or the arguments that you think God better explains than naturalism? And then I'd like to tell you my thoughts on those and hear your thoughts on my position.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know the something from nothing argument. Of course, Lawrence Krauss, being a proponent thereof, would be a statement of faith from his side, that things come from nothing, and we're not quite sure that things come from nothing we observe around us now. Whereas most of the causal arguments of things coming from something are more rational, given that it's our lived experience. So I've read Lawrence Krauss's book, and I've heard some of his debates, and just from a first cause position, I think that's a powerful argument for creation rather than something coming out of nothing. Stephen Hawking's assertion that out of the universe all created itself out of nothing because of gravity is based on the fact that the observation that gravity exists, and I would put to you that gravity has to exist in the presence of mass, or else how do you determine that gravity exists without mass? So just an interesting start-off point. I actually am a latecomer to medicine. I studied biochemistry as my undergraduate work. So I'm from that perspective reasonably well read, at least in science and biological science.
Yeah, sure. So those are definitely both interesting points. The first one, when Krauss, when he says something from nothing, he doesn't mean a philosophical nothing. He does believe things already exist there to create the universe. Same with Hawking. When they're saying that the universe was created from nothing, they mean none of the currently known existing stuff that we have. So our universe was created from something that existed prior to our universe, but our universe wasn't the eternal thing. So all of the physicists usually agree there was something prior to our universe, but it was none of the currently known stuff in our universe, essentially. So nothing doesn't mean literally absolute nothingness that created the universe. Everybody in physics thinks that, yeah, there was something before, like string theory or the multiverse or whatever. And so we agree that our universe was created, but we think that whatever created our universe is more likely more physics stuff than less likely to be a god. It seems like if we're going to try to make an explanation of what created the universe, then we should probably try to use the things we have evidence for rather than adding in things we don't have evidence for. So in physics, we think that space and time are emergent from more fundamental non-space and time things. So space and time are physical things that were created by other physical things that don't have space and time in them. And so we agree that the universe was created, but we think that it's better explained by other natural things that we have evidence for, like the multiverse is a combination of vacuum states in space, which is confirmed by the Casimir effect in physics. So we have empirical evidence of those, and we have empirical evidence of the early universe inflation rate called goose inflation, something like that. And both of those things, when you add them together, you get like the multiverse hypothesis. So all of the parts of the multiverse hypothesis are confirmed in physics. And so using that as an explanation for what created the Big Bang seems like a better way to go than to say that it was a god, since none of the parts of a god have been confirmed yet. Kind of like if we see a hoof print in the snow, we could say that's probably a horse because we already have evidence of horses. But if we said it was a unicorn, that would be a bad explanation compared to the horse because we already have evidence of horses existing. And so the same kind of thing would apply to the beginning of the universe. The combination of parts of the multiverse is all supported and has evidence to show it exists, whereas the combination of the parts of a god don't.
Yeah, all of those are that, and you would admit those are faith statements because one has to assume that these things do exist in order to make the theory work.
Well, not exactly.
Yeah, there's some evidence. Well, yeah, there's some evidence that evidence is what appears to be starting points. Have to be based on assumptions, and they are based on assumptions, and there's some degree of sensibility in arguing those assumptions, as you say, Casimir effect and expansion aspects of it. You will they're assumptions working with the tools we currently understand now, trying to work backwards to an area where we're assuming things that we don't know about do exist.
Well, wait, just to clarify, so those two things are things we can directly observe. So the Casimir effect is a thing we've done in a lab that we've demonstrated presently today. And Guth's early universe inflation is something we observe in the cosmic microwave background. So neither of those are assumptions. Putting them together would be the assumption, is that if we combine these things into a new model, that would be the assumption. But all of the parts have been demonstrated, where that's the difference. None of the parts of a God have been demonstrated, whereas all of the parts of the physics have been demonstrated. So even though the combination is an assumption, because all of the parts aren't assumptions, it's better than just a combination that is an assumption with all of the parts, which are also assumptions.
Yeah, yeah. These are, as you rightly say, observations, and science generally is the cumulative observations of individuals who agree with each other until some other scientist comes up and says they don't agree, and then comes up with a sort of a synthesis of something new. So I do concede that. And science is wonderful. It's looking into what's around us with the tools we have and coming up with reasonable explanations as to how and why they work. The multiverse thing kind of kicks the can backwards down the road and is an assumption that we just sort of come into and out of existence and always have, always will. That's the multiverse. Also the simultaneous existence of other states that we think might be there, but it's reasonable to consider them as an option, like unicorns. They might have been there, but they're not there with no evidence for them, but it's plausible. So we're still in a faith paradigm. So I'd agree. I mean, your position is that the harder you look, you'll find more little bits of evidence that you'll put forward to suggest that things came out of nothing. Again, it's something we don't see currently happening around us, which would be helpful experimentally, would it not?
Well, nobody thinks something came.
Something coming out of something else.
Yeah.
That is a one-off event. Why does it not spontaneously happen now?
It does. That's the vacuum state. So we see particles popping in and out of existence all the time. That's the Casimir effect, the thing I said that we mentioned before.
Yeah.
We're thinking that the Big Bang is just a bigger Casimir effect. That's it. So it is something we see all the time. That's why it was added into the theory.
The string theory does assume that the pre-existence of energy, which does that pop into our existence?
No, energy cannot be created or destroyed. It's the first law of thermodynamics. So they don't think energy was created.
Energy's always been there.
Yeah.
So it's not out of nothing. You're saying energy is persistent and eternal, and always has been, always will be.
Yep. So no one in physics thinks there was an absolute nothing. There's always been energy.
Yeah. So not something out of nothing, something out of something.
Yep. Yeah, so when Lawrence Krauss uses the term something out of nothing just to be provocative, he's admitted on camera multiple times that he doesn't mean an actual nothing. That's just something he's using to be provocative. Everybody in physics thinks energy has always been there.
Yeah, so it's not creation really, it's just mutation of some type of stuff into something else.
Well, sort of, but like, don't you think God existed before the universe, right? So it would be kind of the same.
Yeah, it's equally an assumption. So fair enough. So from that point of view, I think creation, as you said, creation and event is something that you're hanging your hat on.
Yeah, I totally agree. But I think there's a difference. So like well, there's one big difference which I think between the two positions. Like if we see my example of a print in the snow, like a hoof print in the snow, and we say, well, what caused the hoof print? If one person says it was a horse and one person says it was a unicorn, one of those is faith and one of those isn't. See, the horse, obviously we didn't see what caused the hoof print, so we don't know with certainty what caused the hoof print. But to conclude it was a horse is justified by induction. We have lots of evidence horses exist. Horses are a pretty common thing, so saying a horse caused the footprint is pretty reasonable just to say, yeah, we have good evidence to conclude the horse did it. But we don't have any evidence to conclude the unicorn did it because we don't have any evidence of unicorns. So the same kind of thing applies to physics. If we're saying what caused the universe, just like it's reasonable to say a horse caused the footprint, it's reasonable to say the multiverse caused the universe because all of the parts of the multiverse are like all of the parts of the horse. We know it exists already. We've already demonstrated those things exists. And all of the parts of God are like all of the parts of the unicorn, and we don't have any reason to think those parts exist. So I would say that it's not faith for the universe, just like it's not faith for the horse. We have good inductive evidence to conclude this is a real thing.
I think that that's kind of in some ways draws a conclusion that the belief in God is like believing in unicorns, and I think that that's not a fair conclusion. Look, I think if you look at, let's say, um, uh, an Audi car sitting outside, and the belief that looking at the footprint draws you to the conclusion that a unicorn put that foot into the sand, is like saying that I believe that the Audi just appeared out of nothing, instead of saying the logical conclusion that anyone would make if they had never had any learning in science, or they've never built a car, or they're not a car maker, designer, a car engineer. No one would naturally conclude that that car just poof appeared out of nothing. And I do believe that, look, what the explanation you gave about the multiverse, it has some merit, but it doesn't, it still kicks the can down further down the road, because you have to answer then, in the same sense, who created the multiverse. And it doesn't answer the real problem. The real problem is that if for something to exist, there has to be a cause. What is the first cause? You say, you're kicking the can down the road to say, well, the first cause of the universe is the multiverse, but then what's created the multiverse? You haven't answered that problem, and I don't think you can. And of course, to some degree, without looking at the bigger picture of all the other, if you like, evidence, you could draw the conclusion that believing in God is like believing in the unicorn, because you haven't looked at the cumulative picture of evidence. Because of course, one technically it is a possibility that unicorns exist if we haven't ever found one. Although I think it's unreasonable to believe they exist, considering what we've looked at and our cumulative knowledge of this Earth. It seems unreasonable to believe that unicorns exist. But I think if you look at, that fails to take into account the cumulative evidence that does exist, that points towards the fact that the multiverse is just kicking the can down the road. The reality is that there must be something greater that created this universe that we live in.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what Harvey mentioned earlier. I think the ultimate thing is energy. I call it naturalistic pantheism. Essentially, it's just an eternal, all-powerful nature. So I think that energy has always been there. Energy is the fundamental thing, and that's what creates the universes. Essentially, that's what the multiverse is this fundamental energy. And so I agree with you that there does have to be a necessary thing that creates all other things, but I think that's just nature. Nature is the necessary thing.
Yeah,
but nature is an arbitrary abstract. I mean, nature is not a thing in and of itself.
Sure. So it would be the fundamental constitutions of nature, whatever those are, and that would be energy.
Yeah,
what I mean by nature here is that a non-conscious.
Okay. So would you say that nature created things such as morals, love? Is that your position, that you think that those things, you look for a naturalistic explanation for things that obviously are not tangible, or that are not of physical nature?
Measurable.
Yes, so I think those are both physical and measurable things in the brain. That seems to be the consensus in all the scientific fields currently.
No, I think that's the consensus in the scientific fields. There are plenty of scientists who would not hold to that consensus. And look, again, I don't think it's worth arguing over how many numbers of scientists will hold to this or hold to that. I don't think it's true to say that there is a fixed consensus over in all scientists over whether morals are just something that you can explain naturally.
Right. So I'm not just assuming that. That's the conclusion based off of all the evidence in psychology, neurology, cognitive science, evopsych, evolutionary biology. They all say that love is an evolutionary process that is developed due to certain evolutionary mechanisms that made it beneficial for people to have this feeling, or for animals to have this feeling, because not just humans have love. And the same with morals. So these are a result of evolutionary processes which can be seen throughout many different species all across the world and at many different levels. We can watch their levels of development of morality and love based on social interaction levels, based on cognitive ability, based off of all kinds of things. And so it seems like the best evidence that we have is that love and morality are a product of evolution. And that seems to be what 90-something% of people in the field of biology and psychology and cognitive science all think, based on the evidence.
And there are some obvious dissenters, and science has its enormous strides of changes, because dissenters actually think about it again and say maybe what we've been thinking about conventionally is really not defendable. But I concede science, as you well know, and I publish in the area too, are bubbles. Individuals drag along theories that seem to work well, and somebody comes up with another one. A second, you've quoted this particular paper many times, but let's go back and have a look at it again and actually see there's some flawed logic behind it. We're doing it all the time. Let me tell you, certainly in medical literature, as you well know. So not to say that consensus is always the thing. There's a lot of consensus about things that are clearly misguided. If you're building up a picture of evolutionary biology from the bottom up, and you're starting with those assumptions, logic may lead you to these conclusions too. But there's a growing number of scientists who are looking at evolutionary biology and saying, wait a second, the sequence of events that you're assuming, that energy comes to energy, energy comes to mass then coalesces, there's atomic and subatomic observances, there's energy that holds the whole lot together, there's coalescence of these into atoms, into molecules into functional and organic, and then don't know about the inorganic to
You guys are breaking up. 1 second. Oh. You guys in the chat? Are you guys? Am I lagging in the chat? Oh, I think you guys are back. I think it's working now. Yeah, there's a little bit of lag there.
Okay.
That's possible. That's Kopsava NBN, of course. We're just a single pipe across the ocean.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're clear now. Now I can definitely hear you. So.
Okay. Yeah.
The last thing I heard you say was that the consensus can be wrong because they change papers all the time, and I totally agree with that. But I think that the reason that we adopt a new theory or a new paper is because it's provided better evidence. So we always need some way to differentiate imagination from reality. We need some kind of evidence to show that the new theory is a better theory and not just one of the imaginary ones. Because we can always come up with infinitely many imaginary theories. All scientists have their own pet theories of what they think the universe works. But in order to get your theory accepted to replace the current best theory, you need to provide some very substantial evidence to do that. And I don't think the God hypothesis does that any more than any other pet theory of any pet scientist. You would still need to provide something better to overturn the current best theory. And I don't think the God hypothesis has done that any more than any of the other pet hypotheses.
Well, it certainly doesn't appear to have, because of the assumptions one makes that the God, whoever one believes it is, or the one that's currently being spoken about in religious circles, can't be right. So we must find a reason to discount that theory, no matter how unlikely or irrational. For example, the development of irreducible complexities, or the energy to matter, matter to atoms, atoms and subatomic particles to compounds, compounds to molecules, molecules to inorganic, inorganic to organic, biogenesis, and ultimately the diversity of coexisting entities that we see around us now. That little sequence from a chemical point of view is actually very, very poorly supported. with naturalistic theory. And there are some really seminal papers, one or two that have come out in the most recent 2 or 3 years, trying to look at that sequence and postulate a possible evolution from this basic position that you start off with just energy, and then have a look at the observable things we have around us and try to link back a rational sequence of events over time, knowing the laws of physics, knowing the laws of chemistry, and coming to a position of energy to where we are now with some reasonable sequence of events. There's a very, very good paper that looked at the existing evidence now of going from molecules to, at least from atoms to even just it stopped at proteins. It didn't even get to nucleic acids, which tried to break down these points of how these events occurred, how energy became mass for some reason, how mass became what we see around us. And the evidence is very, very thin, and the authors who are not theists at all, they do not even postulate that their God hypothesis is an explanation at all. But they are, in fact, honest. The two Japanese researchers are honest about the absence of evidence and, in fact, the counterintuitive search for it, because what we are seeing does not fit the narrative that it came out of naturalistic processes.
I'm not sure what you mean when you say it's not well supported, because the consensus in biology and chemistry is abiogenesis wins hands down. Like, we've made tons of progress in that field. It's the only hypothesis that's made progress, and there hasn't been any like evidence or novel predictions or papers that indicate design at all. Like irreducible complexity, as you mentioned, from Stephen Myers and I forget the other guy's name, the other three people who do that.
Michael Behe.
Michael Behe, that's the one. Those have essentially been refuted in science as pseudoscience. Like, they don't work. Their specific papers conflate two different kinds of mathematical models, Kolmogorov complexity and Shannon complexity, and so it literally just doesn't work. And irreducibly complex things have been explained numerous times, like in order to build a stone arch. Like, if you build stones into an arch, if you take any of the pieces away, the whole stone arch falls. But to build a stone arch, what you do is you put a bunch of rocks beneath it, and then you remove the rocks beneath it to just leave the stones in the arch. And so even if it's currently reducibly complex, there was more things there that got removed to get it that way. And that's what we see, the exact same phenomenon in biology. So, for example, butterflies, the caterpillar doesn't have any reproductive organs, so caterpillars can't reproduce on their own. They can only reproduce as butterflies. So how did caterpillars evolve before they became butterflies? Well, before they became butterflies, the caterpillars did have reproductive organs, and they lost those over time. Just like how we see certain kinds of critters in caves lose eyesight over time because they don't need it if they live in areas with no light. So irreducibly complex things had...
My question to you would be, if you lose...
What you're doing really in the end is you're just looking for a get out of jail card free in some sense. I mean, to me that could be an explanation, but that's not necessarily the explanation. That's just because I think that the problem in the end with all of this is you've got a set of underpinning, if you like, presuppositions, a worldview that you look at the world and you say that the evidence, at least this is what it looks like to me, the evidence may point in this direction, but because I've a priori made a decision that can't be true, therefore I look for an alternative idea that, of course, we don't have any evidence for. We don't have any evidence for the fact that they lost those organs, therefore that this is how that is explained. That's just an explanation that you use, or it appears like that to me. I'm not a biologist. But it certainly sounds like that when I hear that from you, and that's not convincing.
Well, I think that for me, one second, just let me respond to Steve for just a moment. What I count as evidence is novel testable prediction. So if you have a hypothesis, I think this is how it worked, and if this is how it worked, I can predict here's something we don't know yet, and we get it right. That's evidence for the hypothesis. And when we look at the naturalistic hypothesis, that one makes predictions all the time, and they get right all the time, and they make progress all the time. So that's good evidence to believe that model is correct. Whereas I don't think the God hypothesis has made any predictions that have been shown to be correct. And so I think that's a good reason, not an a priori reason. I'm not assuming God can't be the case. I'm saying if we take both hypotheses and use both hypotheses to make predictions, which one gets the predictions right? Well, it's the naturalistic one. It gets them right consistently. And so that's a good a posteriori, not a priori reason to think the naturalism hypothesis is the better one.
Gentlemen, I just received a message. I'm going to have to leave you. I wish I could stay, and I really want to do this again, Tom. Thank you. I love the way you think. I do. It reminds me of scientific debates, and I enjoy it very much. You are using loaded language when you say build, form, create. All of them do imply at least humanoid interventions of sorts. These are not naturalistic things because there appears to be some purpose behind the stepping stones to put things in place for irreversible complexity, and then suddenly you're left with this thing at the end. The language you use is laced with some human form of intelligence building the building blocks, then moving in them away, and suddenly you're ending up with something complex. Please forgive me. I have to go. That's my life. But can we do this again? It's great. I'd love to debate. Get some specific things too. I'll get that paper if you're interested in and flick it to you to have a look at.
Sure.
Because I've drawn it. It's Murayama and Kitaido, who are Japanese biologists. But I will unfortunately have to leave you as I've got to go now. I'm an obstetrician, that's my life, and we look forward to speaking to you again. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it, and I will talk to you later.
That'll be great. Thank you. Thanks so much. I've got to log out now, so we'll have to do that.
Okay,
right.
so just obviously we're just having a friendly conversation, so I just wanted to jump back because I'm not a biologist. So,
one second, just before you do, I just wanted to make a note, like in case Harvey comes back or watches this later, my response would be to the loaded language thing he mentioned. Like, obviously we humans made up language, and so they're very human-centric words, but that doesn't, just because the fact that we use the words in a certain way doesn't mean that that's evidence that that's how it was made in reality. That's evidence of how humans use language. And so I don't think that that's a good argument that the fact that we use the word build is evidence that it actually was built, rather than just being a product of a natural process.
No, that's true, but I think it does point towards something. I mean, you know, that if evolution is true, in that sense, what guarantee do you have that we can even talk to each other? What makes you believe that whatever we're communicating across the wire now has any validity? That I could be spouting all sorts of nonsense, and what reason do I have to believe that what you're telling me is cogently translated into something that I can make sense of in my mind, and vice versa? To me, I think that the idea that this just happened by chance doesn't make any sense to me. And I look at this, so if I was to ask you, you've obviously looked at things like the ontological argument, the Kalam cosmological argument, the arguments from reason, the arguments from morals. The interesting question for me in all of this is what is the cause that a person like me, when I look at these arguments, and these weren't necessarily the arguments that caused me to be a Christian, because I think human beings are revelatory beings. There's something more to us than just natural, if you like, matter and energy, naturalistic arguments. As in, we consist of more than just matter and energy, but I think matter and energy are hugely important. I don't think what we believe should be devoid of reason. But what I'm trying to say is that what is it that when a person like me looks at the rational arguments for God and concludes that there is a God, and then you look at those same arguments and you conclude otherwise? That's an interesting question that I think would be worthwhile looking at. So, if you sat and listened to a debate between, let's say, William Lane Craig and Lawrence Krauss, William Lane Craig is rather good at talking through the cosmological argument. It's one of his favorite arguments. And I've seen a number of debates between him and opponents who would try to pull that argument apart. And the audience will, in the end, be divided over. Some people will say, yep, he's right. And some will say, no, he's not. Some people will say those arguments are convincing. Some people will say they're not. And I would say probably we're exactly in that situation. Is what do you believe is the reason why some people think that kind of an argumentation is valid and is convincing to them to believe that God exists, versus someone like yourself who's obviously looked at those arguments and is not convinced?
I think it's a difference in epistemology. Like some people see certain things as evidence that others don't see as evidence. So, for example, if we look in sub-Saharan Africa or whatever, they think that when you pray and someone falls ill, that's evidence of voodoo or whatever. And then when we look at it from more Western ideology, we say like, no, I don't think that's actually evidence of voodoo. That's more likely it's just coincidence or whatever, because we have other grounds of knowledge that have given us reason to believe that that kind of a thinking is not very good at establishing truth. And the same thing applies today. There's more in science, we lean towards a kind of empirical kind of evidence where the way that we can reliably differentiate between imagination and reality is novel predictions. Like if you have a theory and you think this theory can make a prediction about what you're going to see in the world and it works, then that's really good evidence. But just being able to make an argument wouldn't be in these same circles. Whereas the rationalists think that no, the arguments themselves, the logical form also counts as a good way to differentiate imagination from reality. And so the differences between the two worldviews, should we focus on more the empirical kind of evidence and say that's the better system, or should we focus on more the rationalist kind of system and say that's kind of better? And pretty much the rationalist system only exists in philosophy today. Mostly all of the scientists have concluded, the sciences, not the scientists, have concluded that really it's the empirical stuff that works, and I lean that way too. And so I think that the reason we look at the same evidence and come to a different conclusion is because we have a different epistemology, and the rationalists think that the arguments themselves count as evidence, whereas the empiricists think not really.
Okay, so just very briefly, I don't want to dump on the moral argument as an example. So because we did talk about this earlier. So you clearly don't believe that there are any moral absolutes.
Actually, I do. So I'm a moral realist. Most philosophers are actually moral realists, even though they're also mostly atheists. I think it's 70-something% are atheists and 56% believe in moral realism. So I do believe objective morality is real, but I don't think you need a non-physical substance to do that.
Right. But how do you ground the fact? So as an example, and sorry for this contrived example, but so clearly you believe that the Holocaust was absolutely wrong.
Yep.
And so how do you? But clearly, as hard as it is to believe, but there are some human beings in this planet who believe that that's not the case. Obviously, otherwise we wouldn't have had the Holocaust. And still to this day, there are some people who think the Holocaust was okay. So clearly, that's it, that moral absolute doesn't necessarily mean that everybody believes it. But so the question is, what's your grounding? What do you see as what do you stand on to say that this is so?
Whoops. What? When did they institute this? That's not good. This did not used to be a thing. All right, see if I can get him back. That was annoying. Arg. All right, I'm back. Well, let's see. Have not heard back. Definitely gonna have to fix that issue. Hey, I cannot hear you or see you right now. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, so can you hear me as well?
Yep, I can hear you. Now we're good.
Okay, that's good. I'll just try and see if I can slightly sort that out. Yeah, like this when the sun comes up, because my office is in the loft, when the sun blasts through the loft windows, it can be really difficult to see. But my halo should probably be gone by now.
Yeah, for sure. Now I can see your hair clearly.
Or whatever's left of it.
right. So
So
you
wait,
were, yeah, you were asking
we're talking
how.
about moral absolutes.
Yep. How
So
do I
I
ground
just merely
morality?
wanted to know what were your grounding for moral absolutes.
I think it's a law of nature, like gravity or any law of nature.
Okay, so but fine. So where does that law of nature come from?
Where does the law? I think it's a.
Well,
I think it's
so it's obviously
fundamental to
not a
physics.
physical.
Like, yeah, I think it's physical. I think it's like gravity, exactly like a physical law.
And so that sprang into being out of nothing when the universe sprang into being. So is that something that's a precondition of the multiverse as well?
Yes, I think so. Precondition. I'm not sure.
So it existed before the multiverse existed?
Oh no, I think that the fundamental nature of reality is eternal. It's always existed. So all of the fundamental laws of the ultimate reality have also always existed. So kind of like you think God's nature has always existed, I think nature's nature has always existed. So just like God has a moral nature, nature has a moral nature.
So in that sense, like it sounds to me like you're just giving God a different name. You realize that because you've obviously admitted that the corollary of nothing created something, obviously that can't work, and clearly I think no one in this world in a right mind would believe that nothing created something. So so for you the answer of what created everything is effectively energy. um, but then you still haven't answered that question of where does energy come from. You're saying that it was always eternally there. That's just your explanation because you don't have another explanation in the end, wouldn't you say?
Uh, I don't think so. I think that just like you think God is necessary and wasn't created, I think that nature is necessary and wasn't created. I don't think reality
Yeah.
could have.
Yeah. So in the end, you're giving you're giving you're using just a different term for God in that sense.
Well, no, because mind doesn't have any consciousness. So mind is a non-conscious, eternal, necessary thing. So it doesn't have a brain or desires or intentionality.
So you don't have any consciousness either.
Well, I do, but the fundamental thing doesn't.
So you believe that something that didn't have consciousness caused something that did have consciousness to come into being.
Sure. Like, for example, the
But isn't that the
fundamental.
same way of saying that I snip my finger and a pizza appears in the room? I mean, that's just as
I don't think so. So it's like saying that the fundamental nature wasn't made of a star, but it created lots of stars. It wasn't made of oceans, but it made lots of oceans. It's a
well, no,
composition
but it
division.
obviously had to have, but it'd have to have the capacity to create those. So
Sure.
surely, I mean, in this sense, of course, the reason why the theist believes that God is the answer for that, because God has all of those attributes within himself, and so therefore he can create something that has those attributes. In other words, like the designer creates a car as an example because he has already all of the bits and pieces that are required to create the car. Of course, he doesn't necessarily. He has the ability to transform metal from one thing to another. He has the capacity to design. He has the capacity to reason. He has the capacity to create. He has the capacity to think about what's needed. Those things don't. The whatever creates something has to have the capacity. Has to have the greater value to the lesser value, if that makes sense. And so if you're saying that whatever created consciousness did not have consciousness, that to me, that's not a good answer.
I'm not sure what you mean here. So like,
That's that is to me like saying like saying I can snip my finger and a pizza will appear, or the footprint in the sand is a unicorn. That doesn't answer that question.
well, it's like no brick has the property of being a wall, but if you put a bunch of bricks together, you get a wall. It's called an emergent property. So new properties can be made if you add a bunch of other things that don't have the property together in a certain way. So there's no problem with saying that, like, no hydrogen atom has the property of being a star, but if you add a bunch of hydrogen atoms together, you get a star. The same thing applies to consciousness. Consciousness
So consciousness is just that. It's just, but consciousness is not made of matter. So consciousness is not something that you can take bits of matter together and create out of.
Well, I think it is. I think all the evidence is that consciousness is made of matter. That's currently the most supported hypothesis.
No, that's the well. Okay, so that's the supported hypothesis among scientists, but it is a hypothesis. But I don't think it cogently makes any sense. But
I'm not sure what you mean there. So the idea that consciousness is physical is supported by all the different studies we have in neurology and brain science, and the fact that we can manipulate consciousness by zapping you in the brain in the right place. That seems to indicate that, yeah, consciousness is a product of the brain, since we can mess with the brain and then affect consciousness, but not the other way around as much. So physical, that a non-physical consciousness?
Well, the moral argument effectively goes is if there are moral absolutes, then that points to an absolute moral law, and therefore, of course, that points towards an absolute moral law giver.
Right, because I'd say a law is more like a law of physics. It doesn't come from a lawgiver. Laws are descriptions of things that exist.
But don't they point towards well, they point towards someone who created a universe that we live in that has those features.
Well, sure. I think that the universe was created with laws, but it wasn't created by a mind. Whatever created the universe is the explanation of the laws. So I don't think you need a mind for that.
Don't you?
Why would you?
Well, that to me is it's a very strong. It's not a single most. That's a very strong inference to me personally. I think the fact that we do have moral absolutes, the fact that they point towards the fact that there is an absolute moral law giver who created an environment that we live in that functions in this way. And I don't think to say that matter and energy simply brought this in. Well, energy, sorry, not matter, simply brought this all into being in this sense. That's not a good argument to me. It's not a cogent argument. That to me, that the very reverse seems to ring true.
Well, why? So that would be the question, is because to me it seems like, just like my example of the horse print in the snow, we can say that what best explains the horse print in the snow? Well, it's horses. We have lots and lots of evidence of horses. That's probably what caused the horse print. But if we have lots and lots of evidence of morality or whatever, then it seems reasonable to think that whatever caused it was the same thing that caused all of the other stuff that we see in the universe, which is laws of physics. So why would it be different in this case?
I think on the contrary. I think if we see lots of morality, then that points towards call it a being, call it a, let's just not necessarily use the word God here, but it points towards somebody, something that has those features. In other words, the fact that there are morals, the fact that they are, I think, universally true, although there are some disagreements on some aspects of morality, but I think there are definitely some moral values that all human beings universally, even very ancient, or like if you go into the Amazon jungle and you find very simple cultures in that sense, and don't hold me to the word simple there, that I'm not trying to be demeaning or anything like that, but we find moral values everywhere. Anthropologists will I think universally agree that there are some universal moral values that we have found in all civilizations, in all cultures. And so to me, that is a very strong argument that whatever brought us into being had to actually have those. and therefore, the energy does not explain moral values. I think a superior being of sort, whatever label we attach to that, I think answers that moral conundrum much better.
Well, I'd say that we also see hunger in every society humans ever existed in, but I don't think that's evidence that the ultimate thing is hungry or has hunger in it. So I think that the same.
No, true.
So I think the same thing would apply to morality. Morality can be an emergent property, just like hunger is an emergent property, and I think hunger can be perfectly well explained by physics.
Well, but okay, so if morality then is an emergent property, then at some point it was okay to commit a Holocaust, and now it's not. So then it's not an absolute.
Well, no, so I think that morality is more like a law of nature, but that's a second argument. So my argument here is that just because it's universally felt that people are moral doesn't mean that the ultimate thing itself must be a mind. It just means that the whatever we're experiencing could be an emergent property that would be sufficient to explain why everybody experiences it. So it doesn't need to be a mind to explain that, just like
well, but I mean, if it's an emergent property, if that's your explanation, then you're saying so it's not an absolute then.
Right, so those are two separate arguments. My only argument here is that it doesn't need to be a mind. Just like hunger doesn't need to be caused by a mind, morality doesn't need to be caused by a mind. That means that if it's a fundamental absolute, it also still wouldn't need to be caused by a mind either.
But if morality has something to do with our consciousness. Hunger is a physical property that we experience because we have a physical lack. I don't think you can. That you're comparing. You're not comparing apples with apples here. You're comparing an apple with a potato. Hunger. I don't think you can use the explanation from hunger to draw the same conclusion as you can with morality, because morality has to do with your consciousness. Hunger is simply a physical effect on a physical problem that you have, that you don't have enough food to eat.
Well, remember, I think consciousness
morality is not something that it's because if I feel pain in my shoulder and the relief of that pain might be hitting my wife, therefore, because it's easy for me to relieve the pain in my shoulder, I hit my wife. That would be the same kind of thing of saying, well, yeah, because I'm hungry, I now have to eat food, or because I don't have enough food, I don't eat food. Morality has something to do with consciousness, that I make a conscious decision that no, this is an immoral thing to hit my wife, so I don't do it. That's a very different thing.
Well, so I think remember, because I'm a physicalist, I think that all consciousness is physical. So I think that hunger and morality are both physical things in the brain that we're interacting with, but our sense of morality, our moral intuitions, are kind of like our eyes. We are seeing something that's there. And so, just like we see,
you would have to then therefore agree that if let's say somebody commits a murder, and you're saying that that's obviously can be physically explained, then surely when you're sitting in a courtroom and a judge says, well, this person's got to go to jail for 30 years, you must think that is morally wrong to do that, because this is a physical deficiency in this person's brain. Why do I have the right to put this person into jail for however long the judge decides to send him to jail for a physical deformity in his brain? That seems to be, we should send all murderers to hospital, and we should try and fix the problem that's in their brain.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that every single person, the reason we send people to jail is more to protect the people who they're going to hurt, not to punish.
I understand that, and of course there's more to that, of course, absolutely.
But yeah, so I agree that it's immoral to
I don't think that cogently explains why somebody does something, what they do.
I'm not sure what you mean. So, like, for example, we have very good evidence of stuff in the brain being the cause of crimes. Like, for example, there was a guy who had a tumor which made him have very immoral sexual tendencies, but as soon as they removed the tumor, they stopped. So they didn't put him in prison. They didn't convict him of a crime because it was all due to the tumor, and they could prove it was due to the tumor. And so once they cured him, they just let him go because he wasn't a threat to society anymore. I think that all crimes.
I'm not going to argue. I don't particularly know this particular case, but I can believe that is definitely true. I don't think that sufficiently answers all human behavior. That just because something has some degree of effect on it doesn't mean that it answers all of it. I don't think that all of human behavior is simply to do with physical molecules. And I don't think that the majority of human experience, like, I don't think the majority of humans would agree. There are obviously some people like you who think this can be explained that way. Yeah, clearly, I think if I told my wife that the only reason why I love her is because molecules in my brain are spinning in a certain way, and if they'd, what guarantee do I have that the molecules in my brain spin? So I think that's going to be conducive to me staying together with my wife, and I actually don't think that that really answers that question. But look, I mean, I appreciate you hold that opinion. I just wanted to mention, it's 8:30. I've actually got some other things planned down the pipeline. I'd set aside about an hour. What I would probably think it would be a good idea for our next conversation, and I'd like to have a few more, is that maybe what we should try and do is set out to have a specific topic that we talk about, and so that because we tended to go all over the place, and which is great for an initial conversation. We get to know sort of where people are, what they think, what our different positions are. But I think it would be both beneficial for us in the sense of I'd like to hear what your positions are on a specific topic, and then just dig a little bit deeper into that topic. Either by just having another conversation or actually doing a sort of a more, formal debate, 20 minutes each, and rebuttals and cross-examination. I don't know whether that's the way you like to do things. We haven't actually done a lot of those things. We're really quite keen to do that, and I think it would be fun. So I don't know. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, for sure. Either one is fine with me. I do them both on my channel regularly. So if you have a preference, we can do either one. Not a problem.
Well, and what's your, obviously with the time zone, 8:30. What's the time there now where you are?
5:30 p.m.
Okay, so because for us, okay, so if would 6 p.m. would mean our time 9 o'clock in the morning, and sort of if we said, because Saturday is probably a better time for us. Sunday morning tends to be a busier time for Christian folks. So is that would, so you're behind us, aren't you? So it's your day. It's Saturday where you are.
Yep.
So is Friday 6 p.m. workable for you, or is that?
Yeah. This is my full-time job, so I can make most things work. It just depends on if I had anything else planned that day. So, but yeah, I've
okay. So that's great. So at least we have a bit of a sort of so if we said that we try to aim for in the next couple of weeks for a Friday your time 6 o'clock, Saturday our time 9 o'clock, that means that, because that would work much better for us. Saturday is a better day.
Sure.
And if we set a specific topic, I like talking about the traditional arguments for God, whereas Harvey's more going to be keen on the sort of biochemistry and all of that kind of thing, because that's his field of study. It's not my field of study, so I try to stay away from arguments that I'm not that familiar with. I kind of know the basics, but as I said, I'm not a biologist, so I wouldn't presume to try and give arguments in that field. Harvey's much better than me. And I wouldn't want to misrepresent a position either. So I'm happy for us to have a think about what topic we want to do, but I'm also happy for you to make a suggestion. So I'm keen to just go down a bit of a journey in that sense. But I think it would be much better, both for your and our audience, if we had an opportunity to just say, well, we'll talk about this particular topic, and we'll try and stay on topic. It's not always that easy, but
Yeah, you mentioned the ontological argument. We could talk about that one. I recently did a video on that one. So
Okay, well, why don't we do that? Why don't we say, are there particular Saturdays of the month that are Fridays, sorry, that are difficult for you? Or is it kind of Fridays is
No, it's pretty much random. It's like whenever I email somebody, they send me back these dates work. And I'm like, all right, I just pick one of those, and sometimes it's on a Friday, so it's kind of random. But I should be free next
oh, that's
Friday, I
great. Well,
think.
that's awesome. So, I would say that so we'll try and either this coming Saturday or the Saturday. So in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we'll definitely be able to hit one. And I think if we do Saturday morning, which is your time, Friday 6 o'clock, now that we kind of nutted that out, I think that would be a little bit easier for us. And so we'll start with the ontological argument, and then I'll chat with the other boys and see if they're keen on doing a formal debate, and if they prefer to just do a more of a conversation style initially, then maybe we can start with just a conversation on the ontological argument, and then maybe have a formal debate in the next one. Maybe that's a good way to do it.
For sure, definitely. All right,
Sounds
sounds good. I will let you go do your other stuff. It was great having you guys on, and I will talk to you guys later.
Yeah, look, and I really appreciated chatting to you. I've watched lots of debates over the years, and people on both sides of this fence can get quite emotional and sometimes even hostile, and I find that really awful. And so I think it's really, really important to have good conversations. I am because I think generally, I look at society at the moment, and quite apart from this apologetic topic, society tends to be being polarized a lot at the moment from a political perspective, and I find that really, really sad. And it's never helpful when people stop talking to each other and stop listening to each other. So I do that anyway because I'm studying apologetics at university, so I'm challenged with all sorts of different positions and arguments, and have to listen to countless debates and read books. So I enjoy that anyway. But I think, as from a human-to-human perspective, I'm always really pleased to chat with people who are keen to just have a chat.
Yeah, absolutely. And
so it was very nice to talk to you.
Definitely. And when the pandemic clears up, I'd love to fly down to Australia, and we can do a debate at your university. That would be awesome.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And one thing Aussies are really good at is coffee. I'm not sure what coffee is like in America, but before I came to Australia 20 years ago, I didn't drink much coffee. Coffee wasn't such a thing, and coffee sort of started coming into Australia 15 years ago. And Australians are really good at it, I must admit. Like,
But
and I'm
that's
a bit
great
of a coffee
because
snob, I suppose.
I'm a bit of a coffee guy myself, so I drink one of these.
Oh, well, there you go. Look at in this town alone, there are about, I don't know, 20 or 30 really, really good coffee shops. So you could we could do a coffee shop crawl almost as much as you do pub crawls here. But anyway.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks again for coming on. Really
Okay.
appreciate it, and I will talk to you guys later.
Okay, no worries. Thank you.